please turn off your video. And if you haven't muted yourself, please do so that we can focus on our speakers. We welcome questions at the end, but please hold off for now. I'll open up the chat box after the formal part of our presentation so that you can post questions there. The idea for the series came about last summer when Audrey Pepper, one of our advisory board members, my partner in this series, and I were trying to find the right words to describe the feelings of anger and horror we had over the death of George Floyd. We spoke about the art, the public art that was being created in reaction, not only to George Floyd, but to centuries worth of social injustices. Sharing and discussing the art broadened our perspectives and deepened our compassion and empathy. We are so very grateful to the artists who take on the immense responsibility of sharing the stories of marginalized communities. We want to learn more about their perspectives as creators. As audience members, we want to understand the role institutions play to ensure that they're doing their part to represent and be accessible to all. Finally, we want to hear from the collector's perspective. What role do they play in this trio? How can they support the artists and institutions that are trying to tell the stories of those whose voices aren't being heard? And so here we are, through the lens of art, building bridges. And I would especially like to thank the Weston Cultural Council and the Friends of the Weston Public Library for their support of this series. Our facilitator is Linda Bond. For over 2 decades, Linda's artwork has addressed issues of social concern, primarily exploring global conflict, and more recently, the chaos and confusion here in the United States. Her work will be included in the forthcoming publications, Emergence, The Role of Mindfulness and Creativity, and Loaded, Guns and Contemporary Art. A 20-year retrospective exhibition of Linda's work at Drexel University, Errors and Omissions, is scheduled for September, and her site-specific installation for the Eastern State Penitentiary Historic Site in Philadelphia will be installed this May. Tonight's speaker is Rosa Rodriguez-Williams, Senior Director of Belonging and Inclusion at the MFA Boston. Rosa came to the MFA from Northeastern University, where she served as director of the Latinx Student Cultural Center. One of the MFA's goals is to be a museum for all of Boston. According to museum director Matthew Teitelbaum, Rosa will be integral in reimagining how we welcome and engage historically underrepresented audiences, truly reflecting the communities we serve. This is one of the most important issues for museums in the 21st century. And now I'd like to welcome Linda and Rosa.
Hi, everybody. I am delighted to be here. I have had the opportunity to speak with Rosa a couple of times, and she's delightful. So I'm pleased that we'll have a nice conversation tonight. Before we do that, I want to share my screen with you. Let's see. Just talk a moment about the MFA and how it's changed since I came to Boston. And I think that Rosa's new position is a, the next step in a long effort to bring in a broader audience into the museum. I taught at Mass College of Art for 25 years, and so used the museum quite often with my students, and noticed how initially empty, in the 90s, the museum was whenever I went there. And this entranceway, which was opened in the 80s, became the main entrance of the museum, and the Huntington Avenue entrance was not open. And in a way, I think it kind of made the institution a little more closed off, especially from the surrounding communities. And in 1995, Malcolm Rogers, who was the director, reopened the Huntington Avenue entrance. And in 2009, it became the main entrance to the museum. And I absolutely noticed in this course of time the change in the museum visitors. And every time I would go there during the day, the museum was full of students and people of all shapes and sizes and colors, and tourists and local people. And it was very, became much more alive. So I think, you know, this a little text just about how, you know, the MFA celebrated its 150th anniversary and has deepened its commitment to inclusion, community, and generosity. And they launched a free first-year membership program to invite everyone to come and experience the MFA. And throughout 2020 and this year, the museum will engage community members and local artists as co-creators on various opportunities for convening and celebration, from a team curated exhibition to a community mural project, which has already been realized. In an effort to increase the diversity of perspectives represented in exhibitions and gallery displays, the museum has launched the Table of Voices, which we'll talk to Rosa about. And it's a new program designed to involve community voices in the MFA's interpretation program on a deeper level. And Rosa Rodriguez-Williams, Senior Director of Belonging and Inclusion, was hired to help facilitate these initiatives. So Rosa, I am delighted to be able to speak with you and ask you, first of all, about the position. What exactly does that mean, belonging and inclusion?
Well, first, let me just start by saying that I'm so grateful to be with all of you tonight. I love to be in these spaces and know that people are really interested in this work and in the work that I do and that I'm so passionate about. And so, you know, I again, thank you for having me and for the invitation. I hope to come back soon to be with you all. But yeah, so it's funny that you asked me this question, because it's a question that even, you know, people who are close to me are like, okay, so belonging and inclusion, what does that, you know, what does that mean? What if they joke around, they're like, exactly what do you do all day? You know, make people feel nice. And you know, I said, no, this is an actual thing. And so what is it that I do? You know, I've spent about 22 years of my professional life doing this work in different spaces. And basically what, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility work, or as the museum calls it, belonging and inclusion, it's really being a strategist or a specialist, a professional that ensures that organizations, which really organizations are made up of people, right? So when somebody says, you know, an organization is inclusive, you know, I include myself in that because I am the MFA, you know, my colleagues are the MFA. And so, you know, my role is to ensure that the organization and all the people in it that are doing the work of the museum work are applying an inclusion lens when they are doing their job. And so what does that look like? I am a teacher, I am a guide sometimes, I'm a coach. I help to apply strategy. I love being a thought partner. To think about, you know, are we hearing all perspectives? Who is missing from this conversation? What identities are not here? What perspectives are we missing from this table? How are we curating inclusive spaces, right? I often say to my colleagues that we are facilitators of the experience and we curate space. You know, we curate art, but we also curate space. And that's what belonging is you're creating a space and an experience that usually is subjective, and it's kind of hard to measure because it is a subjective experience within an institution or in an organization. And you're really helping people to be consciously inclusive. So again, you know, using that inclusive lens, you're being consciously inclusive when they're doing their work, which means that we together as an institution are working towards belonging. It's not just my job, but I'm helping to facilitate those conversations and that work within the museum. My role specifically in the museum, as opposed to other roles in other museums, is, usually folks who are chief diversity officers will be sitting sort of under HR, doing some of the talent acquisition and recruitment and retention, and really working with staff in terms of the culture, the work culture within a space. By my position being within the learning community engagement unit within the museum, is really outwardly focused in terms of the visitor experience. And I would argue that this is the priority for the entire museum, for all of us, right? It's the visitor experience. And so, my role is to facilitate those solutions for departments across the museum to ensure that everybody's doing their part to be an inclusive space. And so, what does that look like? I'm thinking about alongside exhibition, are you thinking about representation? How, what you are doing is impacting audience and different identities? Are you using an diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility lens when you are, putting together your collection strategy or thinking about the objectives of a certain exhibition? With the learning department, our educators really thinking about visitors from a range of identities when they're thinking about their curriculums and trainings and how to represent or present, the collection and other aspects of the museum responsibly. And one of the things that I think is really awesome that the museum does, and it's really to create strategies, and I'm helping facilitate that as well, to create strategies that make connection early with young people, so they can develop affinity to the museum early on and feel comfortable enough with the spaces to explore it autonomously, right? I don't come from a museum background, and these opportunities weren't open for me when I was growing up, but if they were, I would feel more comfortable in a space. I would know more. I would have been, invested in, and I would have been exposed to these things. And so that's one of the things that I'm really proud to be part of, and proud that the museum does really, really well.
So the museum has some programs like the Artist in Residence program, and which seems to be definitely working in that regard to bring young students in and get them not only involved in seeing but in making. Your conversations with the various departments in the museum, you've been doing publicly in a series of talks, MFA Voices, which is pretty interesting. So why do you think, was that something you initiated, or is the museum just interested again in transparency and helping people to understand how the museum functions?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything. It was thought of, Makiba McCreary, who is my boss and also the chief of learning community engagement at the museum. Together we thought of, what's a good way for me to learn and to engage and meet different folks in the museum and learn what they do. And so we thought, why not do something like this and do it publicly, so that other folks, sort of pulling back that veil for people that don't have that museum background, who haven't been exposed to museums, to learn about what happens in the space, and that you don't have to just be a curator or a director of interpretations, or there's different positions and things that are done within the space that you can also be part of. So it's a little bit of sharing what museums do, a little bit of transparency, a little bit of an opportunity for me to, as I start my work here, I've been at the museum for 6 months, to learn from different areas and do it in an engaging and fun way that brings in the public and engages with the public.
So if folks are interested in participating or seeing these, where can they go to find the links? to the meetings, and will they be, I think you said they will be on the website, the previous conversations will be uploaded at some point.
Yep, you can go to mfa.org, and there you'll see MFA Voices, and there's an RSVP link that you can hit and RSVP for those conversations. They're happening on Thursdays from now until June 17th, I believe, and they're at noon. So they're a quick lunchtime, lunch and learn. They're from 12 to 12:30. So they go really fast, and it's just an opportunity for folks to really engage with us.
That's great. So one of the recent or current exhibitions is the Basquiat Show, which has had many sort of tangent activities happening, including the mural that was painted in Roxbury, right? And another program that you have been, I think you've been a part of, is the Table of Voices. Can you tell us a little, maybe I'll show a little clip from the Basquiat Table of Voices piece, and then you can talk a little bit about that program. Would that be good?
Sure.
Okay, let me get to that.
The little bit that I've seen, I know that it's going to be amazing.
It's important for young people of color to walk into it and see a vast amount of people that look like them.
It was the Fab Five Freddy's, it was the Basquiat. He really connected a lot of hip hoppers to contemporary art.
That's like the effect that Basquiat and everyone else in the show had, was that they didn't do just one thing, and they didn't do what people told them. They just did.
I've always been a fan of his work. I got a Basquiat tattoo when I was like a couple of years ago.
This whole exhibition for me is about dreaming and possibilities. Seeing yourself represented is huge.
All those artists are all about imagining a new world.
I have two young kings and a young queen. I want them to be able to express themselves freely. There are no limitations to like who you are as an individual and the individuality of the art that is expressed through our culture. Hip hop culture changed my life, and it has changed so many lives globally. And Basquiat is part of that story.
And he could have done so much more, but showing this is so important for young people to see. A lot of young people, Black and brown children, don't really see themselves in these museums. And for the Museum of Fine Arts to have an exhibit such as this, I think is really, really important. It's culture and art that's been around for so long, but it's just recently being recognized.
So I definitely have a very personal connection just with hip hop in terms of how it helped me be myself.
I'm really excited to see the Ramalzi exhibit. It's a unique opportunity. It's very special. It's very intimate. It's going to be amazing for multi-generations to see.
Seeing it here legitimizes something that hasn't received the notoriety that it deserves. I consider myself a student of all of these artists when I was younger. Seeing an exhibit like this at the MFA is something I never thought I'd see happen.
I love all of that.
So why don't you tell us a little more about this Table of Voices program?
Right. So Table of Voices, I'm sort of coming in. I believe it's been used a few times, and Table of Voices brings in experts from different places. So Basquiat had, hip hop aficionados, had graffiti artists, had folks that know the culture, know the art. So what Table of Voices does is bring people together to talk about an exhibition, to talk about an object, to talk about different ways about, to talk about the story and the narrative and the different ways that it can be told. And so it's just that, it's a table of different voices of people bringing in their ideas and expertise and knowledge to to retell a story or to tell a story in a way that perhaps the museum folks have not thought of, curators have not thought of, or, even, as Adam thinks about, Adam Tessier, who is the director of interpretation, hasn't, thought of. But it brings in sort of a research aspect in real time that is a really beautiful thing, because it not only engages, it brings knowledge to the narrative, right, and different perspectives and different people, right. When I started to talk about whose perspectives are not heard and who's not at this table and what identities are missing, bringing those to the table to share in that perspective only enriches a conversation and only enriches an exhibition. And this exhibition has been wildly successful. It's been extended for folks who haven't been able to get there. You should. It's fantastic. I was actually part of a table of voices in my first week at the museum, and it was for the Greek and Roman gallery, and the experts from academia and different parts of the city talked about citizenship around this one specific object. So it was interesting to hear the different thoughts and perspectives and history of what citizenship looks like here, and sort of bringing the old and the new, the old and the contemporary ways of thinking about certain things to the table. So, these are the folks that were some of the folks that were part of the Basquiat Table of Voices, and that video was just awesome.
So do these gatherings happen before the exhibition opens?
Yes.
To help with the interpretation and the, okay. So that's helping to inform how the museum interacts with the audience. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think Matthew always says we can't present ourselves, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, we can't be in the outside while we're not on the inside. And so when we take the time to do this work within our space, we really do impact the outside. When we do the work inside, it will translate to building trust with a community, to building social capital with the folks that may not have used the space, or who do not use the space for any particular reason, whether they had a bad experience there or they've never been there before. But it's really just building trust with different members of the city of Boston. And if we're going to be a museum that is for all of Boston, these are the things that are required of us to do. You mentioned first year free, that builds trust and social capital with community, and it's an inclusion strategy to bring folks into the space. Artists in residence, the murals for the movement after I think it was the first week I was there, the mural that was outside of the museum, had such an impact, specifically in the Black community, to see, sort of raised fists in the museum really standing up for social justice and being part of sort of that righteous uprising that sort of has come out of after George Floyd and the ensuing protests after that. That builds community, that builds social capital with community. When you're doing consistent things that do not feel like you're being tokenized, or that do not feel like it's inauthentic, but these are things that are happening regularly that reflect you, that represent you and who you are as a community, as a person, and that you can connect with, that builds social capital. And so I'm really, really, really excited for coming in at a time where there's such momentum and such desire to do this work and to step into being uncomfortable and rethinking and reimagining what the Museum of Fine Arts Boston can be. It's really exciting.
So it's interesting. One thing I'm thinking about is that there seems to be a really big effort in many institutions to become more inclusive, and exhibitions like the Basquiat Show, which as one of the women in video mentioned, people want to see themselves in the work. And a lot of people of color have not had that be the case. So what does your role or this effort towards inclusion and belonging, how are you educating white people? How, for instance, are you reinterpreting or interpreting, your more traditional permanent collection exhibitions? How do you try to, broaden that reach?
Yeah, so and as we were preparing for this talk, we talked a little bit about that, and right now I wish I could just like answer the question. I think we're really having those conversations now. It's an iterative process, and these conversations have just begun. But and so I don't have an answer. But what I do know, right, and what I can tell you is that what it's going to take, we have to think about language use, the terms we use when we are referring to certain things. Even now, I'm part of, or I've been helping the learning and some of the educators in the art. There's an Art Finders initiative where teachers ask the museum for certain art pieces to teach in their class, and so the art finders find art and they send it to them. But even in those descriptions, I've gotten a few that Emily has said, can you get your eyes on this and tell me what you think about the language that's being used? And those words were probably never okay, but were used before they can't be used now. And so we need to really think about the terms that we're using, and language will be important. I think also narratives and including what have been erased and what will be important. Those things will be important to, what stories have not been told, what stories did we not know, what stories weren't told on purpose. And so thinking about those things will also be important as we look at, reinterpreting our collection. Using culturally responsive frameworks will be important, sort of decentering dominant culture, that dominant cultural lens. That is, I think about the changes that have happened in the Art of the Americas wing, where the entry, the face of the, before it was like the face of Art of the Americas wing was very Eurocentric when you entered it, but now it's it's making room for new stories, and the entrance now has two paintings by T.C. Cannon, where King George IV used to greet you. Now you have these two beautiful images of Indigenous people that are welcoming you into the Art of the Americas space. And then there's an introductory wall with greetings in many languages, where people can connect to that space as well. So, having culturally responsive frameworks will be helpful in that as well. Then, like I said, centering untold narratives will also be important. What stories are we choosing to tell? How are we telling them? And that's how Table of Voices sort of comes to play as well.
Before we open this up to questions, I just have one last thing I'd like to ask you about. And you mentioned that you're not coming from an art background, and here you are in this major institution, and so you're kind of a good example of someone who's coming into a place that you're not familiar with, and you're learning about things that are new. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about that experience, because the other day when you were talking about it, you got very animated.
Yes.
About this rich resource that you're now right in the middle of.
Yeah, I have to say, today at MFA Voices, I was my guest was a teen from Madison Park High School, Karen Romero, who is part of our teen program, and she was so excited and passionate about art, and she was so excited and passionate about the work. And one of the things that she said was like, I can't get lost here, and I have gotten lost here, and I love it. I love exploring this space, and for me, you know, that was not the case. And so what the museum is doing with team programs would have taken a younger Rosa into a space that she would have been able to explore and grow up in. And so, you know, having sort of that exposure that I never had, you know, Karen now beams at the fact that, she considers herself a graffiti artist and is really creative in the way that she thinks. And I think for me, I'm just starting sort of that journey and that experience and having these really amazing conversations and learning from people who love this work, right? I didn't understand it, but they sort of live and breathe the things that they're doing. I got to experience Monet when it was first being put. I didn't know what Monet was when it was first being installed, and I got to walk around with the director of interpretation and see Monet through his eyes. It was just so incredibly powerful for me. Being in the space with Basquiat was incredibly powerful as a woman who I was born in Puerto Rico, and so having that inner city experience that is displayed within that, and also as my I grew up I grew up in that era, and so it just brought me back. And one of the things that I really think it's true is that cultural institutions are very important to identity formation, because when you're able to see yourself in a painting, when you're ever to be able to connect, like I connected with Basquiat in my growing up, and saying, yeah, those were my experiences too. You're sharing in a story. I think DIA work is storytelling. It's finding yourself and your identity and being able to bring your whole self to a space. And I think art, of course, is storytelling. So I think there's that connection there for these two worlds to come together and share in a person's experience in a way that they can start feeling, they can start understanding more of themselves because of what they see. And that's been my experience, to be able to, one, walk around there and feel like, wow, I really work here and this place is incredible. And I get to, go down to, when the Greek and Roman gallery opens, I could get to do that. Right. And I get to go see, women take the floor and be inspired by that work and the voices that are there, voices because of the art that is just screams out to you. It's just a beautiful thing. And I love it. I love all that you guys have known forever. I'm just discovering, and, I feel like, 6 months ago, I would have objects, interpretation. I thought it was like, oh, they have a whole department that they translate things from like one language to another. So I didn't even know what that was 6 months ago. So I guess I'm a fast learner, but I'm appreciating and I'm learning so much, and I'm just loving art. And it's just a world I never knew that I needed in my life.
That's really beautiful, Rosa. So how about if there are any questions, you can, Jean's going to open the chat and you can put some questions in the chat and we'll see, where we go from there. Sometimes it takes a little while for people to do that. Maybe.
Do you want to, there were a few comments in the chat.
All right, let's see the comments. Oh, so
Barbara definitely knows more about Table of Voices than I do. So Barbara, if you want to chime in, that'd be incredible. I would love it.
This is your night. This is your night.
Barbara, it would be great if you could just tell us a little of the history of it.
Sure. Okay. So not to step on Rose's time.
No,
next
not
month
at
you
all.
can do it
Please.
to me. But
what
happened is that many of you probably attended the Gender Bending Fashion Exhibition. which was incredibly innovative. And the curatorial intent of that, I think, was to reach out to people who were practitioners of street fashion and influencers of androgynous kind of dress. And to do that, they felt that they could not be standing on Mount Olympus and talking about the history of fashion and when pleats were invented in the democracy of Greece or something. They wanted it to be current and immediate. So that was the first time when we actually employed some iPads where we took interviews of young people who are influential in creating fashion trends and recorded them with their permission and actually mounted those iPads along with some explanatory labels in the galleries. That was in the large Lindy Gallery, all upstairs on the second floor. And it was such a hit, not only with our visitors, but with the people themselves who were invited to participate, that it began to snowball. And Rosa mentioned Adam Tessier, who's our director of interpretation, and he's fabulous. And he saw that this was a thing. And so right now we're getting ready to open up 5 new galleries of classical and Roman art. And today I saw an object, which is a 2-headed vessel. The one face is of a Greek woman of white heritage, and the other one was probably an enslaved person who had no rights under Grecian democracy. Nonetheless, that story and that object has always been told by scholars with a very specific focus. We don't feel that we have the right to tell that story from a mono point of view. It has to incorporate the people who have lived or whose ancestors have lived those lives. And so going forward, virtually every exhibition now will include members of the community. It doesn't have to necessarily be Boston. It could be an international expert. But so we're taking a whole new look at democracy through this upcoming show with the help of experts, and that's what it is. So thank you. Thanks for asking.
Barbara. Thank you. Okay, there are a few questions. Let's see. So here we go. So from Paul, wants to know, do visitors see an artist in residence working? How does the public interact with that program?
Oh, so so far, I mean, I think so far, Rob Gibbs has given a couple of talks, virtual Zooms that folks have been able to be part of. I don't think, and you know, the Artist in Residence program is just beginning, and I'm not sure yet how that's going to sort of work out. I'm sure there will be, I mean, once the museum opens, I know that part of the restorative art program that's just launching as well. I know that Rob is one of the artists that is working with those students who are part of that program. So there'll be different ways to engage with them.
And so Joshua wants to know, what sort of partnerships are the MFA developing to ensure that the museum continues to be welcoming to the different communities?
You know, one of the things that that has been really, and you have to remember, I'm in the pandemic world. So, you know, the experience that I've had so far with how the museum has been engaging with communities has been pretty much virtual. And so one of the constants that I've seen happen so far is the partnerships that are formed through community celebrations. And all of those have been phenomenal, and they've all been online. My favorite so far of the community celebration videos has been the one for ASL night, was so great. And MLK Day was also really powerful. So if you haven't seen those, I'm sure you can find those on YouTube. But there's ongoing ways, the Community Arts Initiative that puts liaisons, MFA liaisons in different parts of the community, in different areas in the inner city, in the community, Chelsea and other places, that are engaging with students online and still having those classes happen, is another partnership, a way that the MFA stays connected with the community. I think a lot of the programming that has come out from Basquiat, and sort of my experience that I have seen through sound bites, programming that has happened, and has also been really great to engage the community in that way. So those are sort of my experiences of this space. I hear that so much more goes on when it's fully open, and people are able to come in. Our partnerships with BPS, the things that our learning department does. First of all, I have to shout them out, because the programming that has come out of the learning department, the virtual learning that has happened both in college programs and K-12, has just been really outstanding, and it has been ongoing. And so these educators have just been incredible. And so that's another way that we've been engaging virtually, but it's just been really amazing to see that, during a time when everything was just like, people just threw papers up and ran out of their office. We didn't know when we were going to come back, that things were able to come together, and we still put people first. And that's really inspiring.
So Paul just has a comment here that says a good example of better communication at a big exhibit at the MFA was the Vermeer and Dutch art exhibit, in which the descriptions were much more engaging, describing the people in the paintings, their roles in society, etc. So Patricia asks, are there conversations about changing the spatial display of art? People of color and people of different cultures sometimes have a different relationship to the space itself. And how about creating more opportunities for interacting with art in almost a physical way? Maybe not with paintings, but with sculpture or other kinds of art.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, what I can answer to that. I know that one of the projects that I've been on in the last 6 months is the collection transparency project, where Catherine Gunch has, the director of collections, I think that's the title, correct me if I'm wrong, Barbara, apologies if I am, has been leading to really break down, for those very reasons, in terms of spatial display and sort of square footage, and what is being displayed and how much of it and who gets what galleries, is to find out what we have. And in terms of demographics, how many artists how many Black artists, how many artists of color, how many Asian artists, how many Asian American artists, and knowing where those gaps are, and so that we can understand what things look like, in order to be more equitable. And I'm not sure if that's what you meant with your question, but that's what came to mind. But in terms of the other pieces, I can't really talk about that, because I just haven't been part of any of those meetings.
Well, Paul is saying that the Pleased to Be Seated program at the MFA has always been great. Simply being able to touch a piece of furniture art. So maybe there will be other,
Yeah, I bet, Hannah Goodwin, who is the former manager of accessibility, she actually, before she left, she retired in December, walked me through some of those benches and pieces, and it was just really phenomenal. So I agree that that things should be touched.
So Julie is asking, how can young artists who don't have an art school background get their work into a museum? Is all hope lost? What relationship does the museum have with local art organizations?
You know, Rob, our current artist in resident, Rob Pro Gibbs, is part of, oh my gosh, now the name of his organization has.
Artists for Humanity?
Yes, Artists for Humanity. He's one of the founders, and he works. So we work with that organization pretty closely. But you know what? I was telling folks on prior to this call that you know, those are conversations that we're just really starting to have. You know, I've been meeting with textile and fashion arts to rethink and reimagine their collection strategy that be more like focused on BIPOC artists, specifically United States. We use BIPOC where we mean United States artists, and how we make room for artists who, you know, who we may not be collected but are talented and would like to get their work into the museum space somehow. And so, you know, it's just really rethinking some of the things that have been done, honoring those traditions that are important, that ought to not be touched, but also rethinking about how things have changed and what collecting means now and into the future.
So we have one last question. So Adrienne is saying the mix of people who came into the MFA to experience the gender bending fashion show was a testament to Rosa's point that if people see themselves in the art, they feel welcomed, including seen, heard, desired as part of the MFA community. As a lifelong MFA member, I found it invigorating to be among people that more fully reflected the people of Boston. So I agree with that. I think that in the recent years, we've seen more diversity, not only in the exhibitions, but in the viewing public who are coming to the museum. And it does make a difference when people can, you know, have an experience that touches their own lives, you know.
Yeah. 100%. You know, I'll also just say that I'm, you know, I mentioned this before. It's like to be able to know that all of this groundwork has been done, right? I think, and something that should be noted is that my position was not sort of an outgrowth of, you know, the post George Floyd or sort of those that we've seen sort of other museums move. Like my position was thought of way before. It was part of strategic plan and thinking. And so I always want to say that because I feel like it's important to know that something wasn't reactive, but it was something that was already in the works, and it was because Matthew and others were thinking in this way already. And so I just happened to be hired after because there was a pandemic, but you know, I was part of that interview process for a long time, and then it paused. Anyway, so I do want to say that, and I say that because it feels good to enter an institution in that way, and to understand that it's important, and it has been important, and it has been the way that they've been thinking about it. And to come in with the momentum that has been placed, to come in and be led by Makiba McCreary, who has done phenomenal work at the museum in 2 years that she has been there. To then know that, you know, Edward Green is, you know, the first Black president of the board. To know that there's so many firsts, you know, Rob Gibbs and Rob Stull, two young Black members of the community who are artists, who are part of the first artists in residence, is really important and really amazing, and is a testament to the work that is happening at the museum. To see Rob Stulls on the facade, you know, his banners of his artwork, a young man who grew up just a few, you know, blocks from the museum, that's really inspiring and really touching, and it's authentic. And I think I say that to say that this work needs to happen authentically. And I really believe that the Museum of Fine Arts is, in Boston is really taking those steps necessary to do that work. It's not performative. It doesn't feel performative to me. It's really genuine and true. And I think that I invite people to just come along. It's gonna be fun. I think we're really pioneering something special. And the people that are part of the staff and the conversations that I've had, both with new and old and former board members, with former staff, but I've had lots of conversations, and everybody's like, let's go. It's time, and we're ready, and we're coming alongside you, and we're going to walk it out. So it's really exciting time. I'm so glad to be here and to be part of it. 6 months in, and we'll see what the next 6 months and years to come bring.
Rosa, I think I can speak for everyone here. It's been just delightful hearing you. And when I think about the fact that here you are coming into this position of belonging and inclusion in the time of the pandemic, and to have such a great attitude and to be able to do as much as you've been doing with such restraints and, restrictions that we've had, I congratulate you. And I think that you'll be a wonderful asset to the museum moving forward. So maybe Jean, you want to say a few words before
Wow. How do I follow Rosa? Like, that was incredible. What an amazing conversation. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Rosa. Thank you to everyone here. I'm so excited for the museum, for Rosa, for all of us in the Boston community. As you said, I just can't wait. Like, let's get going. This is incredible. And thank you for sharing all of this with us, because the public does need to know. So we so appreciate your time. Thank you. And please, everyone, join us in May 20th. Barbara Alfon will be speaking from the collector's perspective to finish out our 3-part series, May 20th. Thank you. And everyone have a great night.